right. So the first thing I wanted to point out, and I wanted to make sure that it was on the recording, is that I started using Hailey Bieber's face cream and it's like a face cream that you put on first, and then you put on this like top layer that makes you really shiny. And now that I'm recording an episode and I see myself in the camera, I'm like, oh my God, my face is so shiny. And when Hailey Bieber has a shiny, dewy face on Instagram, it looks nice. But I feel like if you're just like a random person in an office, it's not as nice. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Funny thing is, literally before I joined the call, I was like, I'm so sweaty. Like I have this light sweat layer on my face. So I think that's funny. Not because I was using those products though.
So
totally
we're both dewy?
Yes, we're both dewy.
Yeah. Okay, first thing I wanted to ask is, where are you living? Because I know you were in Ottawa, but you moved, correct?
Correct. And I am living in the West Indies on an island called Carriacou, which is an island that's part of Grenada. So in comparison to about 200 kilometers from Barbados, and then Trinidad and Tobago is kind of the next biggest island towards Grenada, or like around Grenada.
Did you grow up there, or like what is your connection to that area?
My husband's family is from Grenada, and he was actually born and raised in the States.
Okay.
And then he came to Canada, but citizenship wise and heritage, ethnicity, that is where he's from. So we had a pretty cool opportunity then, his citizenship here, to be able to purchase a house on the beach and get out of Ontario and take a big slowdown.
What has it been like?
Not all highlight reels, that's for sure. But also, it's been incredible. Absolutely incredible. It's been kind of almost 2 years in the making in some capacity. We've talked about it for a long time. But it was kind of like birth and pregnancy, actually. You plan and you plan and you plan. And then when it's time to go, like it's go time. So my husband actually was in Grenada with our 3 boys by himself for a month before I got down here, because I got stuck in Canada with our dogs. And I lived at my parents' for a month with our dogs. And then we all got together, we met up, and now we're in our actual home here. So the kids are still not in school yet. So that's a thing that we're working on. And I haven't had fast food. There's no fast food here. So that's coffee is not the same. Lots of those things are different, but at the same time, like it's incredible. We have a kilometer to a completely private beach where there are no other humans that are on it at any point in the day, except maybe one of the 8,000 people that live on the island. And we actually have a beach in our backyard too. So it's all of those little things I can do without McDonald's or Burger King for that trade-off. That's, but yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. We don't have hot water. I'm doing laundry by hand because we have a low water. Yeah, it's a low water island. So we do water harvesting and have a cistern in our house. And we may eventually get one, but they're really, you have to have a special kind of like low volume washing machine. And I've got to find someone as well. There's people who they'll pick it up and do it for you too, but we just are still kind of in that settling in phase.
So I feel like you need an entire Instagram account just to showcase your life and like the lifestyle that you're living now, because it's so different from what I'm sure most of your followers are living. Like, do you share any of this stuff?
I do. My Instagram account for this specifically is called Caribbean Canine. So Caribbean, like Caribbean, and .K9, because in that there was a reason why I got stuck with the dogs. We also have a small hobby breeding kennel for Malinois and Dutch Shepherds. So it's kind of I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of Eve Rodsky and Unicorn Space, kind kind of in
Yeah.
the world. Well, dogs are my unicorn space, and now I get to do it here. So that's the account that really captures our life. The kids doing, they're learning how to climb trees and pick coconuts, and my one kid wants to learn how to, catch crabs, and like, yeah, we're trying to document the best we can, and really, like, it sounds really cliche, but honestly, to show friends and family, like, see what we're doing, see what every day looks like, not so much about like, yeah, the growth or the wow factor in it, because like I said, there's a lot that doesn't make the highlight reel too.
Where is your family located? In Ottawa?
They're actually in Belleville. I was born and raised in Belleville,
Oh,
and
okay.
so my sister and my nephew and brother-in-law are there. My parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody's there. So when we go back, it's easy to see everyone we need.
Got it. So you said you had 3 boys. What are their ages?
My oldest will be 11 in a month. My middle is 7, and my youngest turned 4 in February.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you the question that I ask everybody. So, what was your transition into motherhood like? And then also, I'm always curious, people that do like content creators or people who start like coaching businesses or anything to try and better the pregnancy, labor, delivery, motherhood experience for people. I'm always curious if they started it after they became a mom or were they doing it previously. So you can explain how you became interested in the birth topic, I guess.
Sounds good. And if you don't mind, I might kind of inverse those questions so it makes a little more sense for my journey.
Yep.
I was a birth nerd in high school. I had read Ina
Oh.
May Gaskin's work, by the time I was in grade 10. I was planning on going to midwifery school for university. Like, that was my thing. I was totally obsessed with it. And then wow, it feels like ages ago. What happened next? No, midwifery's training is very difficult to get into, specifically in Ontario, especially for high school graduates. They're looking for older people who have lived experience, or people with at least an undergraduate degree of something else. Not to mention, at the time, there was only 3 of those programs out there, and they took very limited number of students. So needless to say, I went a different route while I was trying to figure that piece out or get something under my belt. So I went into nursing, and obviously that's the solid choice to make. I'm a type A, I'm going to come out with a degree and I'm going to have a job. It's perfect. And in my, between my second and third year, I actually took an independent elective placement through a private company called Work the World. And I traveled to Tanzania and worked in a labor and delivery ward as a student nurse for 7 weeks. And in that time, I caught 71 babies, and 20 of those were labors I managed completely independently. No physician, no other senior nurse. Like, I was the one doing everything as a second year nursing student. And my parents were so afraid I'd never come home, in the sense of like, I'd fall in love with it and never come back. Like, I would just stay there forever and ever. And it was the coolest thing ever. And the mentor I had, the nurse midwife that kind of took on students who came, her name was Sister Shao. And I remember she looked me square in the face and she said, "Are you here to teach, or are you here to learn?" And I took a big, giant, deep breath, and I swallowed and I said, "Oh, I am here to learn." And she did everything she could to really, really show me and build my skill set. So I fell in love with the work. But I also realized that going back home and doing work in labor and delivery was going to be really hard, because I started to recognize all of the challenges. And don't get me wrong, Tanzania was highly medicalized as well. They used Pitocin with all of the births. There were lots of episiotomies. There were sutures without freezing. Like, there were some really, really crazy things that I saw. I actually fainted the first birth I saw there. I forgot to mention that. Flat on the floor, like,
Oh,
fell in
wow.
like the goo, the amniotic fluid. And then I was like back up before the placenta was
Oh,
born. And I was like, I cannot miss this. So it just really, really stuck with me. Like, it was changed the way I viewed a lot of things, and not just birth, but just and myself and the world and our healthcare system here. Because again, when you have to decide if you're going to give someone a, Pitocin injection after they gave birth to hopefully prevent a postpartum hemorrhage, or give them lidocaine to freeze them while you suture a episiotomy, those are decisions you don't have to make in Canada as a student nurse. Never. You don't have to make that decision as a staff nurse. And there was no choice. You had to
Because
make
doctors are doing it?
No, because we have the resources to use both.
Oh.
So that would make sense. Like I had one needle per patient, and both of those drugs needed to be given through a needle, and you can only use it once. And so it was like, okay, how bad is the repair, and do they really need to be frozen, or should they have this medication? And again, coming back to kind of the way things are happening here, I thought, you guys have no idea what actual decision making is in the moment and problem solving, because they've never ever faced that. But like you said, it really shifted a lot inside of me, and resource management, when it comes to actual supplies and things like that, is kind of a little piece of my heart because of working there. And I'm really considerate and mindful of, how supplies are used. That's a total other tangent, but it really, and so when COVID happened, and everybody started thinking, how are we reusing masks? And I'm like, hey, there's places in the world who have already been dealing with a lot of this stuff, and this isn't new. So that would be kind of where I fell in love with. So I was definitely very interested in this before. Funny thing is, I got pregnant about 3 months after I came home from that trip, and I was pregnant throughout my whole 3rd year of nursing. I fought an uphill battle against the department to complete that year successfully. And I gave birth to my son. I had contractions during my final clinical placements. And I gave birth to him May 17th, which was the final day of my practicum placements. So then that broke me entirely, to be quite honest. My entrance into motherhood was not as I expected. And it shook me. I was really lost. I was someone who knew how to do everything well. I got gold stars when I was, 10 years old. Our vice principal said she wanted to be like me when she grew up. I was that person. And I had a C-section that I didn't want. I had a new partner living in my space because, again, my spouse and I had not shared living quarters. He was in the military at the time. He came home. He was lucky enough he took the full pat leave and stayed home with our son while I went back to school to finish my nursing degree. And again, I'm looking at the date and I can't believe that it's been 10 years since I graduated and finished that. And so needless to say, that kind of whirlwind did not go well. I had postpartum depression with psychotic features. Surprise, surprise. I got really, really sick. And no one really knew what to do. I had a depression diagnosis before, so I kind of anticipated things would be tough, but the care team around me, everyone around me just didn't quite know what was going on. Because again, the person I am is I can cover it up. I can mask it. I can do the things I need to do to get that gold star and then crumble and go bonkers behind closed doors.
Can I ask why did you end up having the C-section? What was that situation?
I had planned a home birth. I had, the sheets on the bed. I was hardcore into I didn't even have a hospital bag packed. That is how into the natural birth movement I was. And again, that's kind of where I am now, is on the opposite end of that spectrum, because that setup didn't help me. So I accepted a stretch and sweep before 39 weeks at the suggestion of my midwives. And then at 39, so not even 39 weeks, I went into active labor. My water broke. There was meconium. And I was in labor for a really, really long time. nothing really was progressing all that much. And so my midwife gave me the option of, do you want to keep laboring at home or do you want to go to hospital? And the geographical area I was in was my decision. I could either stay home and labor longer, go to the closer hospital, but not have my midwife as my primary care provider, or I could leave now, drive a little bit further and go to another hospital where they would have full scope of practice. So I opted for the latter. And once I got there, everything's like stopped. I had back labor. I had, just those contractions that were keep coming, but nothing was really happening. And so I labored like that for like, I don't know, 17, 18 hours. And I got an epidural in the morning. And once because I was exhausted, again, didn't want an epidural. So aside from going into hospital, having the other struggles, there was a lot of things that I just didn't want initially, and I didn't see as part of my path. And then by 3:00 that afternoon, I had a physician put their hand on my foot and say, well, you tried, but if nothing happens, we're going to have a C-section in the next couple of hours. And that was it. I never had an opportunity to actually understand what was happening. I was not in distress. The fetus was not in distress. He was tolerating labor like an absolute champ. Aside from the meconium at the beginning, which fast forward, all of my babies poop at 39 weeks. They all had meconium when my water broke at the exact same point. We went on to find that I give birth to babies at 39 weeks. That's when I go. But so all of those kind of little pieces just added up, and I was defeated and exhausted. And I had my spouse there, and my mom was there, and everyone was tired, and they all, looked at me and said, yeah, you've tried really hard. And I accepted and consented to the C-section. So it wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a scary event. It was a classic story of failure to progress. And for me, it wasn't even the surgery itself. It was more so the recovery afterwards. My son was taken from me, and he went with my husband and my mom while I waited in a recovery room by myself for a half an hour or 45 minutes. I don't remember seeing him for the first time. And my first thoughts, again, I was awake out everything, but when I say conscious thoughts, I mean, the one that you're like, oh, that's what I thought about first. My lips were dry. And all I could think of is, why hasn't someone given me chapstick? And the level of shame and guilt that I carried, that first thought wasn't, where is my baby, haunted me for so long. And then whenever I tried to talk about that, people would say, oh, but he was okay. He was with, his dad, or he was with his grandma. I said, but nothing was wrong with me. Like, why wasn't he with me? Why did you take him?
Where did they take him? Yeah.
Just down to the room where I was going to go after to stay. And nobody thought to be like, hey, dad, mom, you guys could here. He could sit, even like, it just didn't make sense. But at the time, I wasn't in a place to advocate for myself. I had just had a major surgery. That wasn't my job to say, hey, brand new mom who just had a major surgery, and brand new dad who thought his partner might have died. I was fine, by the way, but my husband did not know that. And that is the part also that, it wasn't our job to ask. It was their job to do it. And that was kind of that starting point for me with my birth experience and what I opted to do with what I do now. Because I see myself as, I was educated. I was in my 3rd year of nursing. I was a birth nerd for years. I knew all of these things. But when it came to the actual experience inside the healthcare system, it was a whole different beast. And I now know there are ways you can navigate that and communicate and do things ahead of time and ensure other people in the space are aware of your needs and all of that stuff. So you are not left lying alone, wondering, where the chapstick is and not spending it with your baby.
So many people, because I know one of the things we're going to talk about is birth trauma. And I think when people hear birth trauma, they think of these like big dramatic things that could happen during labor or delivery, which that could be like an example of birth trauma. But just what you were saying, like having been separated from your baby, like I know one of my good friends was separated from her baby for a little while, and there was talk amongst the healthcare workers in the area about how there wasn't enough room I think her daughter had to go to the NICU for a little bit, and there wasn't enough room in that particular hospital. And so they were debating whether or not they had to move her to a different hospital, but my friend would stay in the hospital that she was in. And like just that experience like still bothers her. And that was like a huge, like she just remembers just being so afraid that they were going to take her baby to a different hospital. Like she didn't know what was going on. And so it doesn't have to be this big, like dramatic thing that you would see on TV. It could be something that just seems like, oh, it was like a moment where like you were unsure, but it's such a big deal when you're in the moment. And then it can be hard to get over that afterwards.
Especially, right, if you're like, you don't have the vocabulary to even describe what it is. It's like this sensation of like, something's not right. I like to call it that icky feeling where you're like, oh, something's wrong, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And what I say to birth processing clients is that your body remembers what happened. And that violation against like your personhood is just as real and just as traumatic as the violation against your physical person too. So when you're demeaned or you're dismissed, when you raise a question and say, what about this? And they shush you, those are attacks on your personhood and not, treating you as an adult. And those little pieces along the way, and then you combine it with any other kind of that power imbalance. And it's so tough. I also tend to compare it to, the way we often think about sexual assault, in the sense of, we often have this idea of it being this scary, traumatic, dark alley story, when in reality, we know that there are non-violent experiences that may even exist in the context of a loving, caring relationship, but it still is wrong and it is still assault. But because we have this assumption of this is what it looks like, it's the big scary monster, you are really isolated then because you don't think your story is, bad enough or traumatic enough. Or you bring it up in a mom's group, for instance, they're like, oh, well, you're lucky, I got this, or, I was stitched from here to there. And it's like, again, I'm sorry that happened. But for me, this is what haunts me. And we don't get to pick and choose what parts of those experiences stick.
Do you find it like, I always think in an ideal world, women would be giving birth in a center or like a place that is not the hospital. And it would just be like this magical place where the rooms are set up to be like so comfortable and have everything that they need, and, like beautiful bathtubs. And I don't like, that is my dream.
Yes.
As opposed to, I feel like when you go into a hospital, there's like a power imbalance and you feel like you have no control and like you're just waiting for instructions. Like, okay, what do I have to do now? It makes people nervous. Like,
Exactly.
I don't know. Like,
yes,
why
yes. All of the above.
are we giving birth in hospitals? Yeah. And I feel like it's set up the way it is now. And also we were going to talk about like inductions and, like people saying, oh, you have to have a C-section. We're going to schedule you on this day. Like, not to be like, maybe people will get upset at me for saying this, but a lot of how we do things in pregnancy, labor, and delivery is so that it's easier on the doctors and that it fits in their schedule. And
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And it's
yes,
not the
yes.
doctor's fault. Like
No,
it's the system.
that they work within, that they also make a lot of decisions to lead. But yeah, it's the system. And that is how they make their financial earnings. But they also, I have to say, like, we've also got nurses play a big role in that too. When you think about how care is actually conducted
Yep.
and the fact that, doctors aren't there managing your labor. And rarely are you attended by the physician that you've seen throughout your pregnancy? Maybe, but it's not that common. Most
Yep.
places are on call schedules, which again, I think is a disservice that folks don't even know that the first appointment that they have is, hey, guess what? There is this percentage that I will be the delivering physician for you. People should know that from day one so they can prepare themselves for that for the day that it comes, because it's a shock when it hits them. But that's an aside that, again, nursing staff are the ones making decisions. They're the ones calling the physicians to let them know when someone is ready. I don't know if you saw a video circulating a while ago where the nurses were arguing with this woman who was standing up. Like literally you could tell by the look on her face and the noises she was making, like there was a baby like coming out, no questions. And the nurses are like, oh, you were just 4 centimeters. Well, okay, that's fair. But like she's standing up doing this now. Like we need to address what's going on. But it is the system and the way it is set up. And the problem, or the kind of that trick around, especially inductions, is something that I really like talking about, because like it's not necessary a lot of the time. It is a lot of the time based on convenience, and it is offered routine, and it is offered as if it is part of normal care. That is my issue. Is that when things are presented like that, it makes it feel as if there is no other choice. Or if you were to make another choice, you're the oddball and you're going against the grain and you're trying to be difficult. Not that this intervention has no place to be here unless it is necessary. But I also know many people are offered and talking about inductions before they're 40 weeks. Um, people have inductions scheduled prior to that, and without appreciating the fact that there's significant risk to that intervention. Again, I don't mean that as like a fear mongering piece or like no interventions. What I'm saying is without, like in a normal, healthy pregnancy that is putting along, there's no reason to have an induction at 40 weeks if you're not ready for it. Again, that does not mean if you want it for mental health reasons, for I know if you're scheduling, you have family support and you can only have someone there within that window. Like, absolutely. But you need all the facts. You need to know what the chances are that this induction is going to end in a C-section before you even start it, because your doctor knows that percentage. And they know the likelihood, and so does the staff. But it seems as if the person who's actually going through it is kept in the dark.
I will explain what my situation was, and I do find it interesting. So I had a really good pregnancy, no issues whatsoever, but around 36, 35, 36, 37 weeks, they were monitoring me really closely because Milo stopped growing. He just plateaued. And so I would go in for regular ultrasounds to see if he was growing at all, and he wasn't. So my OB her thought was like, we need to get him out so that you can feed him in the outside world so he can start growing again. So I was like, okay. But so I was induced at 38 weeks on a Friday, and my OB was on call on the Friday, which I'm assuming that's why obviously I was induced that day. Also, my husband's a physician, so the kind of agreement, or because all the physicians work closely together, if you are a physician's wife or you're a physician yourself, they will make it a point to make sure that your OB delivers your baby, just as like a nice gesture kind of. So I knew that she would be the one to deliver my baby regardless of when I gave birth. But then I was like, oh, it's interesting that I'm being induced on the day that she's on call. Do you know what I mean? So like I get it. I get it. I also like, and like people don't understand it. And I see the behind the scenes and I understand how it works because my husband is a specialist who is on call. And so I understand how it works. Like when I had surgery on my nose, I ended up with a complication, was bleeding in the hospital for like 5 days. The only ENT in all of Ottawa that could do, they tried everything and nothing was working. And the only ENT that could do the procedure that could stop the bleeding was on call whatever day. So I sat in the hospital bleeding from my face until he was on call to come do the surgery. Like, I'm not dumb. I understand that that's why I was waiting for 5 days to get the proper surgery.
Yeah. And that's it, right? Like there's so many pieces that are behind the scenes that many people don't know, or like you said, even just the vocabulary, right? When you understand some lingo or you understand what on call actually means, that gives you, an advantage to navigating the system that most people don't have. And most people, like you said, they have some already negative connotation or just like that fearful, maybe not negative, but it's not their favorite place, or that power imbalance of as simple as when you ask questions in your prenatal appointments and how you're answered, what type of response you get. Is it a response, or is it are you being pushed to the side? Are you being dismissed? Are you being treated as if you're a silly little girl who doesn't know any better and you got yourself pregnant and now here you are and I have to take care of you? And that kind of infantilization on grown-ass adults really, really sets the tone throughout that journey. So when you come down to the end of it and you're tired and you're really pregnant and your feet hurt and your family's coming and you go to that appointment, they say, you know what, we can induce you, in a couple of days if you want. It sounds really good. It sounds like a great option, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of it being discussed for what it is, as an actual intervention with risk to yourself, to the birth, and to the baby. And when it's not really shared that way and it's only looks as a cherry on top of this hard journey you've been on, it's hard to make a choice. But also for, in your case, there's reasons that we have it. And it's there for a reason. And there are times when absolutely it is the best choice, or kind of, the best choice out of the options you have. And my first labor was augmented. My last one was as well. I've never been induced, but I've had Pitocin on board. And that's the other I find funny. Sometimes people are like, give me a list of 10 reasons why this intervention saved them or their baby. And it's like, again, I understand. I'm not saying they're not necessary, but if you're not making the decision for yourself, then it's pretty hard to know if it was or not.
With birth trauma, I always think about how people that go through a miscarriage, infant loss of a pregnancy, birth trauma, it always blows my mind how you go through something like that, extremely traumatic, and you're just sent home. Whereas, like, I'm pretty sure my sister witnessed a car accident, like a really bad car accident. She was the first person on the scene. Like, it was fatal. People had passed away. And I'm pretty sure she was offered services, therapeutic or speaking to a counselor, something like that. And it blows my mind how women go through really traumatic experiences when it comes to pregnancy, labor, delivery, and we're just sent home. And we're also, especially when it comes to birth trauma, we are like the birth of our children, it's marketed in such a way that it should be the best day of our lives. So there's this added pressure and almost like shame around, well, that was not the best day of my life. Actually, it was extremely traumatic and I'm suffering from that day. And so there's almost like a sense of shame of like bringing that up or acknowledging that. And so I feel like a lot of people probably live in silence when it comes to birth trauma, but it is so common and there's no resources for it, as far as I know.
I have a really awesome resource. That is why I actually developed a group birth processing program called Unbury Your Birth. And Unbury Your Birth is designed to help people unbury those exact feelings that you just described. Because when we do reach out for help, when we do try to talk about it, when we try to mention it, we are met with, like you said, that expectation that we should be happy. Oh, you have a beautiful, healthy baby. Be grateful it wasn't worse, this or that. We just push those feelings down and we bite our tongue to make other people feel comfortable. And we can do that in a million ways when we become new parents. Again, I've the people in the birth space, right? People coming quickly to visit you at home, all the ways that we don't protect. That's not a nice way to say it. And I don't mean to blame anyone. All of the ways that our boundaries are ignored and dismissed as new parents, that extends into the way we talk about our birth experience as well. And often people, the first time they have ever had someone say that, like what happened to you was really wrong and it should not have happened. Or I am so, so sorry that the day you gave birth is one of your worst memories. Sometimes it's the first time anyone has ever heard that when we sit on a discovery call, like not even actually doing the work. It is just saying like, you're allowed to hate that day. You are allowed to be angry. And again, it's like you have to wonder, is it postpartum depression where you have that rage, or is it actually being really angry about how you were treated or what that experience actually was, and then not having the space to unload it and unpack it and truly understand what happened to you? Because again, like you said, your sister's experience, like, there was formal structure to help debrief. If nothing else, people get to debrief. And I think that is a kind of a bare minimum, but we wait until 6 weeks and go back and see the same person who most likely violated us or is a part of the team that violated us and won't necessarily provide us with the entire picture. We know they will provide us with their perception. But most people, again, they don't even know that they're entitled to a copy of their full, hospital record from their stay. So they can understand what pieces of the puzzle happened. One example I really like to help people, I don't know if you've ever heard this kind of amongst people, but it's like, yeah, I got an epidural. I took a nap. And when I woke up, shit hit the fan. And, I was 10 centimeters and the baby's heart wasn't going well or, not responding well. And you look back at their hospital records, and while they were napping, staff had been incrementally increasing the Pitocin and not informing the laboring person. So they napped through an increase in labor intensity, frequency of contractions, and progression of labor. So when they wake up, they aren't aware that that is the level of intensity that they're at. And they can be really, really overwhelmed and scared. And it can feel like it came out of like total left field. It's not even napping as well. It can be just, when the nurse comes in, they're chatting and they're plugging away at the IV pole and, oh, everything looks good, and they leave, but they've increased the medication. And they didn't tell you or ask you permission if you're comfortable with that. Because, based on their practice standards, they are obligated to inform you every time a dose is changed. So you can make an informed decision if you want more or if you're good where you're at. And that, again, is their job in those moments to explain the benefits and risks of doing so. But what happens then is you get this layer of, oh, it was a traumatic birth. You had a C-section. You didn't want a C-section, or you got an epidural, and you're disappointed. That's often a kind of phrase that people get. But when it's only allowed to be looked at under the lens in that 6-week appointment with your OB or your midwife, and never supported elsewhere, people often are left with a lot of unanswered questions that could really fill in the gaps for them and give some clarity around what happened. And I say we can't go back and change it, but we absolutely can understand it, because it's not there's records of what happened to you, and it went through a process. So we can figure that process out and figure out what happened when and how.
So if women are listening who maybe they're pregnant for, the second, third time, or there's women listening who are pregnant for the first time, what is your advice to women who are going to undergo labor and delivery soon? Like your advice to them so that they can kind of take charge and understand what their options are.
Awesome. I think that is a fantastic question and a pretty loaded question. But I would start by finding, I really think the education piece is essential, but not all childbirth education or prenatal classes are the same. I really just, if nothing else, don't take the ones that your hospital or your midwife's clinic offers. Take something that is independent of them, not through public health, not the posters you see up in those offices. Look for sources or resources from individuals that have already experienced it and have found it helpful. That being said, on the opposite end of the spectrum, avoid all natural. Here's how you can avoid an epidural or no intervention birth, pain-free birth. All of those kind of things are equally as risky and may not offer a full picture of what to expect. Because again, like I said, you need to know what's happening in the hospital.
I feel like those kinds of things, like have a pain-free birth, like birth at home or whatever, as soon as you are dead set on having your birth go a specific way, you are setting yourself up for disappointment because it can go so many different ways. It's so much of what happens in labor and delivery will be out of your control, but you should understand what your options are. But as soon as you're like, yeah, I want it to go this way and it's going to be perfect, you're setting yourself up.
What I really thank you for kind of bringing it down here is I help people understand what their care expectations are instead of establishing birth preferences or a birth plan or, and really what I avoid is a birth ideal. That's that vision of this is how it's going to be and it's fixed and it's concrete. And when we go outside of that, it's really hard to cope and adjust. Whereas care expectations are understanding the context and the climate that you are going to be in when you're receiving care. And then you're going to establish how you want to be treated by the staff in that scenario. So it is not that I do not want Pitocin. I want no augmentation. No, what I want is the nurse to follow their ethical, their practice standards, follow their code of conduct, provide me with the appropriate options available to me, and allow me to make decisions for myself in that setting. And my decision might be that I want that medication or that intervention. My decision might be that I don't. And it goes through really all of what I call the big five. So it's movement and restriction to movement, nutrition and fluids. Cervical checks is a big one as well. Establishing how you want those to happen and in what context and when. So rather than focusing, like I said, on the things, you're focusing on the how and making that really loud and clear to yourself, to your primary care team, to your support person, and the moment you walk into whatever space that you are birthing in. My own birth, my final birth, I knew I was going to be delivering in a very VBAC hostile environment. And I scheduled a pre-labor conference with the social worker, the team lead, and my midwives and my husband to go over what my expectations were and to make sure that they were actually on my chart before I made it to the hospital. And then I put the onus on the unit to ensure I was staffed with nurses who could fulfill my care expectations. Otherwise, I was going to report them. And that was it. And there was no questions. I got really good staff. They respected what I wanted. They asked things in the way I needed. And someone said like, oh, like you're going to be that person? I said, damn right I am. I know that this is the only way I can guarantee this is how I will be treated well. I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to beg. I'm not going to plead. I'm going to tell them I know what's up and this is how it's going to go. But the trick is you have to do that before you're in labor. You can't make this plan, as you're going to the hospital. This isn't a discussion for the night before when you think contractions are starting. This starts early on in your pregnancy. And you got to practice putting up those boundaries and establishing those expectations early on with everyone.
Yeah, I always say like spend less time decorating the nursery and more time preparing for labor, delivery, and early postpartum for sure.
Yes. And early postpartum, I also include in that umbrella of birth trauma and the things that can happen during that time. Again, not to dismiss how incredibly important that time is too.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So if people want more information on what you do, you have a website, where can people find you? And also what will they find on your website or if they wanted to work with you?
I always suggest start on Instagram. It is the place I'm most active. I do have a website as well, which is thegoodbirthco.com. But if you're coming for learning and wanting to dive into kind of that content, what I do is I help people either process a birth they didn't want, prepare for the birth that they do want, and I also train doulas and other birth professionals to actually mitigate birth trauma before it happens and take action in protecting birth spaces for their clients rather than stand by as idle witnesses of the birth trauma.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me and finally getting connected. And also, thank you for asking me all of those questions about my new exciting, slower life that has made a lot more space for this type of work. And I'm on a roll.